All right, now we want to talk about the concept of sacred objects. We talked about other elements of the sacred on this channel. Now we want to talk about sacred objects, which basically is the material accoutrements for worshiping God. Now, many people will wonder, what do you mean by that? What those sacred objects and these are material accoutrements? We want to unpack it a little bit as basically how we use stuff for connecting with God. And ultimately, in that process, understand that how we have to think about how God uses stuff for connecting to us. And we confess that God uses stuff to connecting to us all the time, because the chief expression of that is in God's interaction in the material world, culminating ultimately in the very person of Jesus Christ. He is the chief expression of God invading our material world and interacting with us through basically the stuff of human flesh, God becoming one of us. Nevertheless, it's this precedent of God using stuff to interact with us, and then we, of course, use those objects to interact with him. But it really does lend itself over to the sacred objects, the reality behind them, and we have to actually pose a series of questions where we think it through. For example, when we talk about sacred objects, are we really positing that the stuff itself is magic? That it possesses some power in and of itself? Obviously, we'd like to say no. In a modernistic context or even a postmodern context, we might even want to say no. But then we have to remember that there are parts of the sacred text dating back into the Old Testament where the Ark of the Covenant gets stolen by the Philistines, and they experience all sorts of problems because of unauthorized possession of a sacred object that is supposed to be used in ancient Israelite worship. Well, if the power of that object is only active insofar as it's being used in authorized worship, then why would they encounter those problems? Or why would you see these problematic episodes where people are interacting with this sacred object in an unauthorized way? So something's going on whereby the object itself has some sacred elements to it, whether or not it's being placed into authorized use. Or how does God use those objects in his interaction with us? Is it the object itself? Is there some reality behind the object that we're thinking of? We oftentimes really want to try to get to the bottom of that. And I'll tell you that oftentimes most of those questions are largely unhelpful, because in the mystery of our interaction with God, it's oftentimes not easily explainable how it is that God uses the object to interact with us, how we use that object to interact with God, exactly what is of this object is itself. Has God infused some sort of sacrality within this? And obviously, we don't want to get too superstitious about things, but at the same time, our piety and our reverence is being expressed through these objects. So it is a mystery. It's hard to nail down. Oftentimes, there's actually even some dangers in trying to explain this too much. Ancient thinkers discovered that oftentimes by trying to drill down to define these too closely, they ran afoul of what would be considered to be some of the treasured truths of the ancient church, to the point where now we would actually see in our hindsight that sometimes what I say is proto-heresy is born of a discontent with mystery. I just don't like the fact that this is a mystery, and so I want to drill down into this even deeper, and as a result, sometimes I can run afoul of things that are timeless and true. But nevertheless, in our trying to understand sacred objects, we know that God uses stuff to interact with us. There's a sense in which there's symbol activation. There's way in which objects are activated for our use in use of sacred rites. God does interact with us in some capacity there this way, such that our own piety and reverence is signaled through the use of stuff in this manner. Now, sacred objects tend to fall into, there's a couple of different labels that can be applied to them. They can be either communal or personal. And then in both of those categories can either be fixed, stationary, or portable. And so if you take those labels and apply them, something can be personal, a personal sacred object, but also then it subdivides into either portable or stationary, or it can be a communal sacred object subdividing into portable or stationary. Examples of each of those. For example, like I said, in the Old Testament, everyone is familiar with the Ark of the Covenant that would be carried around and used for Israelite worship. Well, that certainly is portable. It's specifically designed to be carried on the shoulders of Levites at the time. But it's used in communal worship. It's not someone's portable thing, but it certainly is sacred. It's one of the most sacred objects that you have in that text. Well, something of a New Testament or a Christian a reflection of that even now would be, so for example, if you see someone carrying a cross in a major worship service as processing into that holy space, where it's not someone's personal cross, it's being used specifically for that communal worship time. And oftentimes within Catholic settings, you see people bowing as it's going by because they're acknowledging that this is signaling some sort of unique presence of God walking into their space. So things can be communal and portable. They can be communal and stationary. You see this in art, in sculpture. It's sometimes the architecture itself. In the Old Testament, you might see altars that are built up and built up with stones. You can't just pick those up anywhere. Now, that would be elements of church architecture, things within the church, furniture or different tables, altar spaces, which aren't going anywhere, but it's still a sacred object and it's stationary in place. Personal sacred objects still also fall into those two categories, whether it's portable or stationary. Stationary sacred objects for the personal use is someone's going to be holding a cross, putting a cross on their wall in their home. It's meant to now bless the home in some way. It's some way in which people are declaring themselves a Christian home. Don't take it off the wall and carry it around all the time. It's fixed in one place. Or personal, portable sacred objects are something they carry with them. It can be a crucifix that they carry with them. It could be jewelry. It could be a rosary. Oftentimes, it's the Bible itself is a personal sacred object because the Bible doesn't just contain the words of God. It oftentimes, by being published in a single book, itself becomes a sacred object. In fact, before the 20th century, oftentimes you could be confident that if just one book, it was just the Bible within this one published book, and that was all just one sacred object. In the 20th century, we had the advent of the study Bible, which oftentimes would place someone's commentary within the same pages of the Bible, and that sort of muddied the waters because people aren't accustomed to all looking within one book and determining how much of this is sacred and how much of this is secular all within one book, which became problematic for us over time. But nevertheless, even the Bible is a sacred object, and it tends to be personal. Or it can be communal if you have a large Bible that's used in the churches. But nevertheless, using all these categories, we think through the manner in which God interacts with us through stuff. We can have a much bigger conversation about this. But the bottom line is, think about the way in which God interacts with us all the time, through the material world and through the things we have around us. It's really not escapable. We all do it. As a result, it's good for us to think it through. How much am I allowing the stuff of life, the vast collection of objects around me that have some sacred nature to them, are they reminding me of my relationship with God? Are they reminding me that God is constantly pursuing a relationship with me, and I'm allowing them to have their maximum impact? Sometimes there's symbol activation that takes place for these as they're used within our sacred rites, but sometimes they just are there, and as a result, we see them, and it reminds us about how close we ought to be to God because we're surrounded by those accoutrements of worship all the time. There's something to think about as you go throughout your week. Have a great day. If you enjoyed this content, please hit like and subscribe, and we will keep it up.